Welcome to You Are From God, where we open the Bible and learn to see the image of God in ourselves and the people around us. I'm Scott Taylor.
And I'm Tyler Hall. Thanks for joining us today. Welcome back. We're very thankful that you have tuned in for another episode of You Are From God. Scott, we are back today, and we are going to talk about the idea of skepticism. Maybe you're listening to this program, whether it's on the podcast or maybe on the radio, and maybe you struggle sometimes with believing the things that we discuss here on this program. Now, obviously, those things come from the scriptures, and so you struggle with believing what the Bible says about God, about Jesus, about life, about the world around you, about other people, about yourself. And so today, we just want to start a conversation. Maybe it'll turn into another series. We'll kind of see how this goes. But we really just wanted to open the door and invite you to engage with us on this program. And so we really want to make the next few episodes about answering questions that you have, dealing with topics and struggles that you may have when it comes to faith and believing in the God of the Bible. And so as we begin this conversation, Scott, we have to acknowledge that this is not a modern issue. This is not something that, well, just because we're so technologically advanced or we've reached some new zenith of enlightenment, our culture is just so smart now that we struggle with believing this antiquated theory of, a biblical worldview. The fact of the matter is the Bible's always relevant, and even in the days when it was being written, people were struggling to grasp and wrestle with who is God, what is he doing, and God's still aware just as he was back in those days, and he invites us to engage with him in these questions. The problem is when we aren't willing to engage him in those questions and we say, well, I don't know if I believe in this. I listened to this article over here or this YouTuber over here or this, scientific explanation that all of my teachers have told me, and so I'm just going to go with that, and I just can't shake that. When you're not even willing to give God the time when he says, come, let's reason together. And that's just an awesome invitation that we're not even taking up. But the fascinating part of this, Scott, is that God wants us to bring our questions to him. He's not afraid of them.
And that's the most powerful thing to me throughout the scriptures, to your point, whether we're talking about the New Testament, which we'll get into in just a minute, but even studying Isaiah, you just see this time and time again, the questions that come up, or where is God? We see that throughout the scriptures, and so it's not new, to your point. But when you get to John, the first chapter, Tyler, there's some questions that are asked that we see in the New Testament, especially here in John, the first chapter, that the first thing I think we need to make sure and make it very clear, it's okay, to the point you just made, it's okay to have questions. It's okay to want to have answers. The danger sometimes is whether or not we're willing to go and get the answers or willing to listen to the answer that is given. And that sometimes can be our struggle. And so John, the first chapter, we have this story where they're meeting the Messiah. And you have Andrew goes and gets his brother Peter, and he comes and he sees him. And then you have Philip. And Philip goes and sees this great man and very faithful man of the Old Testament, Nathanael. And he brings Nathanael, or goes to Nathanael and tells him, we have found the one that Moses in the law and the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. So you see the excitement that Philip has. And Nathanael's response in verse 46 is, can any good thing come out of Nazareth? And Philip just simply says, come and see. And Tyler, I think there's some important pieces with this part already, is that it's not Philip trying to answer all of his questions on his own and try to make it about what he views the scriptures to say or what he has seen in this one. He says, I want to introduce him to you, and I want you to meet him, and I want to allow him to do what he does, and he's going to show it to you. And sometimes it's that simple when you're dealing with people that do have questions. Instead of trying to get them your opinion or us going to an article, as you talked about, or going to various different things, just going to his word and allowing God to reason with us, as you brought up. And that's such an important thing for all of us. He's going to go on here. And he is going to go. And in verse 47, Jesus saw Nathanael coming and said to him, behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom there is no deceit. And Nathanael said to him, how do you know me? And Jesus answered and said to him, before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you. And Nathanael answered him, Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. again, we'll stop here. I don't know what was going on underneath the fig tree, but there was something that Nathanael was doing that he obviously was amazed that this one he was standing before knew. And Jesus makes it very clear. He doesn't tell us what it is, but I saw you. And it causes him to say, you're the Son of God. And so he takes the time to listen to him, to accept what he has to say, and get past the prejudice thought of nothing good can come from Nazareth. Now, it's worth noting as we go forward that a lot of people think Nathanael is from Nazareth, so that would kind of make a little bit more sense as to why he had that view. But obviously, it shows the view of Nazareth at the time, but it was up to Jesus to show who he was, and he absolutely does. And Nathanael is willing to listen to what he has to say.
Well, and certainly, not everybody from Nazareth is a bad person, right? So this is like you said, a prejudice, and we have prejudices all the time, whether it's how we've been raised, whether it's the goals and the dreams that we have, the way we see the world for whatever reason, might give us prejudice against something that the Bible tries to teach, something that God's trying to teach us and guide us in. And so a lot of times we need to have this very personal understanding. Here it's Nathanael actually having this interaction with Jesus. Jesus in verse 50 simply says, "Because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree, do you believe? You will see greater things than these." And he said to him, "Truly, truly, I say to you, you will see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man." It's just this awesome point that Jesus basically says you haven't seen anything yet in how we would say it today. But that's where we are, Scott. We struggle to believe unless it's directly impacting my life. If I need to see a miracle, he needs to show me right in front of my face the thing that I'm wanting the answers for. And God doesn't operate that way. And the fascinating piece of this is God does engage us in our day-to-day lives. But again, it's about putting aside those preconceived notions, putting aside this is how I've already thought, and actually just going to Jesus and hearing him out, actually being willing to listen to these things. The idea here is, ultimately, Scott, we have to be willing to take the skepticism that we might struggle with or the doubts that we have and actually take it back to the source, not just go from hearsay or what somebody else explains away. And before we go on, I think it's really important to mention this. A lot of the times, I think, and I'll speak for myself, and listener, I wonder if this is true for you. I don't go to God with my questions because I'm afraid of the answer. I might already have an idea of what the answer is, and if I'm worried about, God says that I shouldn't be in this relationship, or God says I should give up this habit that I've been engaged in, or God says that this type of behavior is not acceptable for those who want to spend eternity with him, then that means I have to sacrifice something, or I have to give up something. And so we don't like that, and so we just don't even bother going down that road when we miss the whole point that it's following Jesus, that anything that we're leaving behind to follow him is worth it time and time again to lay to the side and to chase after him, to go and be his brother or sister, to be the child of the living God. And this is ultimately what we see when we come to the end of the book of John, where, again, one of Jesus's disciples, now it's been years that they've been working together, and this is after Jesus has died. You might know him as Doubting Thomas. The Bible doesn't actually use that term, but we just call him Doubting Thomas because of this episode in John chapter 20. Jesus has already appeared to many of his disciples and shown himself after his resurrection from the dead. But in John 20 and verse 24, it says, "Now Thomas, one of the 12, called the twin, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, 'We have seen the Lord.' He said to them, 'Unless I see in his hands the mark of the nails, and place my finger in the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will never believe.'" So here you have a skeptic who is demanding the empirical data, the evidence that he can touch, that he can see, smell, taste, touch, hear. He needs to be able to sense it physically in order to accept it in that sense. He won't accept it any other way, he says. Now, that's a bold demand, but Jesus is patient with Thomas and with us. And verse 26 says, 8 days later, his disciples were inside again, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands, and put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe." Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." What's fascinating to me, Scott, is the Father could have raised Jesus without a single scratch on him, perfectly whole and new. That's within the power of God. And yet he leaves these scars, these wounds, in part at least, specifically so people like Thomas could see and have the evidence that helped them believe. And Jesus is not afraid of Thomas's questions like, "Oh, that's a big ask." Like, "Well, I'm not going to condescend to you and deign to let you, poke around on the wounds that I went through for your sake." Jesus says, "Here they go. Here you are. Go ahead. Don't disbelieve, but believe." Obviously, Thomas then, when he has this understanding and comes to wrestle and brings about and sees that these questions have an answer that's real and true, he says, "My Lord and my God." And that's what God wants for all of us, to draw closer to him and see that he is the real deal. Jesus says something very important here in verse 29 that leads into the next two verses when he says, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe." Thomas, you're so wrapped up in the empirical evidence about what your eyes see, and yet there is an opportunity for people long after this has come and gone, this time that Jesus is alive on the earth. And he says there's going to be people who are blessed because they don't see it with their eyes, but they see it with the eyes of their heart, and they understand. That doesn't mean that there's no logic involved, but it means that we come to an understanding that this is real. That's what John says here at the end of this chapter when he writes, "Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name." John says the main point that I wrote this gospel is so that there is a record of what Jesus did, these awesome things that he accomplished, these signs that point to his divinity and the gospel plan, and so that believing in him, you can have life in his name. It's for you. These accounts are written for you. Are you going to engage with them? Are you going to study them? Because that is the opportunity we have.
I think it's important to point out to parents, and Tyler and I are both parents, that there's going to come a time where the kids have to build their own faith, and it's okay for them to ask questions. And the amazing thing is that there are resources that are out there, and we would love to help you in any way that we possibly can. And so as you see with these two stories that we told, and we're just beginning this conversation as we go forward, but when you think about these two stories, the men were willing to accept the answer, and that's all we're asking. If you're willing to ask the question, be willing to dig for the answer. And so on our website, if you go to youarefromgod.com, it'll take you to the West Mason Church of Christ page. And on the top, there's going to be different options to choose. And one is the Connect. And you can send us a message if you would like to receive a Bible correspondence course. If you have a question about the subjects that we're talking about, please feel free to ask us, and we'll get back to you as soon as we possibly can. If there's a subject you would like us to talk about, let us know, and we'll do that as well. There's also sermons under the resources and articles and other things that you can, other podcasts actually, that you can go and you can look at. And so it just gives you an opportunity to see some other things that may help you with this subject and many other subjects that we have. And so just go to youarefromgod.com and we'll get that to you if there's a question that you have, or the information that you would like to get. But as far as today, Tyler, it's just so important for us to be willing to ask the questions and be willing to accept the answer. And that's, again, is a struggle for so many, especially young people, when you're dealing with this time. And it sometimes scares parents. And sometimes it scares parents because they may have the same thought. And so be willing to sit down and to study and to build your faith. This isn't a blind faith by the scriptures. This is a faith that is built on evidence. And as we go forward, we'll be talking about that as well. The most amazing thing about it is that whether you have doubts, whether you are firmly standing on your faith and you continue to grow, is that whether you understand it or not, you truly are from God.
Thanks for listening. Show your support by leaving a review on your podcast app, and share this episode with someone you want to encourage. If you have questions or would like to get in touch with us, go to youarefromgod.com. That's youarefromgod.com.